Today is Saturday, April 17th, 2010, and we are in the offices of the Etowah Valley Historical Society in the 1903 Gold Dome Courthouse in downtown Cartersville. I am Jeannie Jolly Certain, and we are here today to interview Clayton Jackson Harris for the EVHS Oral History Project. Welcome, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
I know that you have been a member of the Bartow County community, particularly Taylorsville, Big Pond, and other communities out in that area your entire life. So start out by telling us about where you were born and go into that.
I was born at Stylesboro, about 2 miles up Taft Road, almost at the end of the road. And I've always been told that it was a log-built house, and lived there till I was about 2 years old.
Okay, and then from there, where did you go?
Then my mother and father bought about a 60-acre farm over on, it was not named Jackson Road at the time. We moved there in 1933, but it was a connecting road between Big Pond on the east and came out at Big Pond on the west at Macedonia Road. And we lived there 12 years, and that's in the U Harley Militia District.
Tell us about your parents.
My parents, Renee Harris and Vera Beatrice Jackson Harris. Renee was a son of James Ivy Harris, who was the president of the Bank of Taylorsville from 1925 till 1945 at his death. And my mother was the daughter of W.I. Jackson, who operated the country store at Stylesboro on 113 now. And all that's gone because the store was discontinued and later burned, and the house burned last week.
Oh, how interesting. I know you're one of several children.
Yeah, I'm one of. My mother and father had 8 children. We had 3. They had 3 daughters that died before they was 5 years old from a childhood disease that no longer exists. But at that time, the girls were affected mightily by what they described as eczema, and they had no cure for it at that time. But then my last sister was that's younger than me. She had medicine had improved, and she survived and lived a good long life.
Okay, and your other siblings?
Well, I had an older brother, Charles. He was the oldest one. He served in World War II for about 5 years. And Hubert, the next one, Hubert worked GE in Rome, and he was a basketball referee that most people in this part of the country knew him as a high school basketball referee because he did it about 40 years. He passed away a few years back. Sister Joanne married a Duval from Dalton, and Duval was in the poultry business with Strain Poultry Company, later Kegels, and he retired and passed away a few years back. And then my sister, she died about 6 years ago.
And I know your father died young.
My father died when in 1936 and left. I haven't mentioned the youngest brother, R.O. He lives in Texas and been out there now for over 50 years. But my father died in 1936, left my mother with the 5 children under the age of 16 all the way down to less than 1 year old. And she did a tremendous job of raising the family. And we get to times when we don't know. I don't know how she fed us, but she did, and we don't remember ever being hungry.
But you had a great boyhood, even though you worked hard, but you played hard too.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about some of that.
Well, until I was 14-year-old, we lived on this Jackson Road, which was not Jackson Road at the time, but it got named that a good many years later when Monroe Jackson moved on the property and lived there about 60-something years, and it became known as Jackson Road. Traveled with the Harrison Gentry boys, I call them, which is about 5 or 6 boys that lived across the field. We rabbit hunted together and played together, and the Garrison family, that is particularly memorable family as we was growing up. Mr. Sam Garrison used to let us ride his mules on Sundays. Most people that worked their mules during the week wouldn't let us ride them on Sunday, but he always, we'd ride his mules on Sunday, and a lot of times we'd end up with corncob battles in the barn before the day was over. Sometimes it turned into a fight or something when somebody got a little too rough, but then Robert Jackson and Frankie were belonged to Roe Jackson, and Uncle Roe's wife, she was sick a good bit of the time back then, and they practically lived with us from time to time for a number of years too.
Tell us about your education.
Well, all my education was done at Taylorsville School. I started school at Taylorsville, and the best I can remember, it was the first year after consolidation of Big Pond, Crossroads, and Davistown. And as best I remember, it's the first year we ever had school buses in the county too, in 1936 or 37 I guess it was. And
do you have any particular memories of education there in Taylorsville?
Yes, the first year I went to school, I got sick with pneumonia and only attended school about 60 days that year. At the time, and doctors get all uptight today when they see a scar on my back from having an operation for pneumonia. Modern doctors never heard of that. But it turned out I had so much infection in the lungs that they couldn't draw that out with a needle, and Dr. Walford Danford here in Cartersville had to cut me open, and they left a pretty good, took out about 1 inch or 2 of rib, and it left a scar that's been with me all my life. But I passed the grade that first year, and Ms. Mildred Deaton was my first teacher.
Mm-hmm. And you went on to graduate from Taylorsville High School.
Right, graduated in 1948 with a bunch of good kids, and we have maintained a close friendship now for over 62 or 3 years.
That's marvelous. So you really never have gone very far away from Taylorsville, but you did when you entered the service.
I entered military service on April the 19th, 1954. Spent 2 years, almost 2 years, in service with 16 months and 22 days in Korea.
I was amused. Mr. Harris has done a fine job of writing his own autobiography, which he shared with me before today's interview, and I was amused that I almost counted it down to the hours of how many he spent in the military.
Oh, over there, and when he's getting close to time to come home from over there, we get it down to the minutes.
Yes. Well, tell us about what it was like to be in the Army and your service in Korea.
Well, in my opinion, and this is an opinion that I'm sure I share with a lot of other people, it wouldn't hurt a lot of our people today to spend that 2 years in military service. It was very educational for me. I worked a message center operation in Korea. I was in the Signal Corps, and I taught myself to type. Now, typing in high school was something I hated with a passion, but over there we sent and received messages on teletype machines, and I taught myself to type. You know, working a 12-on, 12-hour shift. Some nights we'd have all night work and wouldn't be nothing going on. Practice typing, and that's something I've used in my, been good for me all these years to know how to type.
One of your chores was working with the Red Cross, and it was receiving messages back and forth from the States to military people over there. I found that very interesting. Tell us about that.
The Red Cross representative would bring in around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon a whole slew of messages that needed to be sent home to the States, and we would send them out over the wires, and he always came in bright and early the next morning. He'd get messages back from there. And one of the things that was always interesting in some of those inquiries through the Red Cross was, why don't Junior write home? We hadn't heard from him in a month. Well, we'd get that inquiry, we'd turn it over to his commanding officer, and the commanding officer would have a talk with him, and we might send out a message the next morning that Junior was doing fine and that he'd try to do better. And a lot of times, though, the messages were very serious. They'd be reporting deaths in the family back here that needed to be got to them, and those were the kind of messages that Red Cross looked after.
Yes.
In the message center, we worked all night long. It was a 24-hour operation, and sometimes we, during the daytime, if you met a general on the street or out in the field, the first thing you do is salute him and show all kind of respect. But they'd come in sometimes in the middle of the night or 3 o'clock in the morning in their pajamas or something and hang out with us there in the message center, just like one of the guys. And there was a General Townsend that was from Cartersville. Now, you might know who I'm talking about, that was in the military at that same time, and I think his path crossed over there during some of those sessions.
Are you grateful for your military service?
Yes.
Well, I'm grateful for it. Thank you for serving for our country. What other things besides the ability to type did you gain from that?
Well, I guess I learned to meet people and interact with other men. Some of the things that I served with were some Mormon boys, and a good many of them would volunteer for that 2 years service and get sent to to serve over there during their term, and that served as some of their rules that they had in the church, that they had to be a missionary for a certain period of time, and it served for them to do that.
That's interesting.
And of course, the Army on holidays and Thanksgivings and Christmases, they put enough food out there on the tables for thousands of soldiers, and they might not be 500 eat, we'll put it that way. And at the end of the services, we on several occasions gather up all that food we could get and candies and whatever and take it to the orphans' home. And in fact, the Masons sponsored an orphans' home there in Taegu, Korea, that we would make a point to carry stuff to. And my relationship with those Mormons was very, very good.
Good.
I had a high respect for those boys.
Yes, yes. And I know you married before you went overseas, so tell us about your marriage and your family, your children.
Married in 1953 to a girl from here from Cartersville. We had 3 children. In 1978 we divorced and I remarried Betty Sue Stevens from Waycross, Georgia. And on April the 22nd, 1978, and she had 3 children. We now have 8 grandchildren between us, and somewhere along the line, well, we have one great-grand that that's a direct line of hers. And then we have 3 or 4 step-grandchildren because one of the daughters married a fellow that had a couple of children, and they've had children now. And she never has had children of her own, but she claims all of the little ones.
So a large family. And I think I remember you said that your last grandchild to get married got married recently.
We had a wedding about 3 weeks ago out near Gardendale, Alabama, of Lance. That's my Mary. That's my daughter that lives here in Taylorsville. And that's her oldest son.
Uh-huh.
And he married a girl that graduated from Auburn right the last few days. In fact, she graduated with a not a master's degree, but a doctor's degree. And then the grandson is due to graduate sometime next year with a doctor's degree. So they're getting good education.
Great.
The grands are.
Yes, yes. I know you're proud of your family.
I certainly am.
I know that when you returned from Korea, you had a job waiting for you. Tell us about your career in banking.
Yeah, Mr. Will Dorsey, who ran the Bank of Taylorsville at that time, and had inquired about me working at the bank. When I came back home, we communicated, and I had the job in January and got back and went to work in March. Spent about 27 years in the bank, in the banking business, and left in 1982. That's during the time that my children were all born, and we lived in the same house in Davistown that I live in today.
Mm-hmm. That bank, a lot of the small towns in Bartow County had banks, and very few of them do anymore. So what do you see as the way that banking has gone over these years?
One of my biggest regrets in banking and in my life has been the fact that, and I guess it could be a controversial opinion, but if the Bank of Taylorsville had remained small, mm-hmm. like it was when I went to work there, but we did well from the 60s to the 70s, and in the early 70s, the banking laws got changed, and we decided to put a bank in Cartersville, and that proved fatal to the Bank of Taylorsville. The people that bought it had bigger designs than the small town of Taylorsville, and if I could do it over, I would keep it small, and I'd stayed out of Cartersville, and it would not have been an attractive investment for the big money man.
Right.
And we could have still had a bank in Taylorsville. They got control of it, and within 3 or 4 years, they closed it in Taylorsville, and we had to find new places to bank, which seemed like there for a number of years. Every time you find an independent bank and knew the name of the president, somebody come along and took it over, and I don't know who the president of any bank in Bartow County is anymore.
Right, they're too big. I thought the small town bank really served the community that it was located in.
You know, I sat one time and had an argument with Bert Lance, and you know who that is. He said the primary purpose of a bank is to make money for its stockholders. Well, my theory was the primary purpose of the Bank of Taylorsville was to serve the community, and if we made money for the stockholders, so be it.
Right.
But he taught in classes that the purpose of a bank was to make money for its stockholders, and he got to be, that's money rules.
Yes, very much so. I know that you have been a member of the Masonic Lodge for 60 years, I believe it is by now.
It'll be 58 years on June the 26th of this year.
Okay, tell us about your love of the Masons.
Well, I joined the Taylorsville Baptist Church in 1951, and then I joined the Masons and started in February of 1952, and it's been something that I have been personally involved in and participated in for 58 years. I've been the head man at John W. Aiken Lodge in Taylorsville on 4 different occasions. I've served as secretary for 25 years. I've been on grand committees of the Grand Lodge of Georgia. I was the worshipful master, and worshipful master is in that organization is equal to president of an organization, that more people understand what that means. I was head of the Bartow County Masonic Convention. I've been Master Mason of the Year in Bartow County on at least 4 occasions. I'm honorary member of U Harley Lodge and Cartersville Lodge, and I participated in the 7th District Convention in Rome for at least 50 years of those 58 years. I'm enjoying my masonry now about as much as ever. We're doing a lot of visitation programs that we go to different lodges on different nights of the week and support their programs. One of the things the Masons are doing nowadays that should be made public information, and presently the Bartow County Board of Education is considering sponsoring the CHIPS program, which is Child Identification Program, where we get those 2 and 3 and 4-year-old kids in and identify them with their pictures and DNA and that kind of stuff at no charge whatsoever to the parents. We do the identification on the computer, and then when it's completed, there's a DVD made of that kid, and the record is destroyed on the computer and given to the parents. And the parents then, if they ever had a child get lost or misplaced, all they got to do is unseal that envelope that's in and give it to law enforcement, and they'll be way ahead of the game in trying to locate that kid. And we're attempting to, we've done some local programs in the Taylorsville area. We identified 100 kids last year down there, and we're hoping to get cooperation from Bartow Board of Education where we can do a lot more children in the county. We can't do them all at one time, but we can start grades 1, 2, and 3 maybe, and then add some the next year or two.
Well, that's a wonderful program, but that's not the only program that the Masons sponsor. I know that you have an orphanage, and that you also made reference earlier in our conversation about the orphanage that you participated in when you were in Korea.
Yeah, we maintain a Masonic Children's Home in Macon, and it takes a lot of money to run them things nowadays.
Yes.
It used to be a self-supporting deal where we had a good bit of land down there, and they farmed and made their own living, and then the government comes along and says you got to have sprinkler systems, you got to have handicap ramps, you got to have certified teachers and all of this, and it's become a very expensive operation, but we still do it, and we have an endowment fund that we can constantly adding to because of the cost of doing things.
I know that you're very interested in genealogy, so tell us a little bit about your work on your family heritage.
Well, my interest was piqued in this genealogy. I guess I was 65 or 70 years old before I realized that my grandmother was a Davis. When she married my grandfather, she was about 19 years old, and my daddy was born when she was about 21 years old, and she died shortly thereafter. When I discovered that we was having a family reunion and we were discussing names for it, I decided to research Sally's descendants. Her name was Sally Davis. Come to find out now, she has over 200 people who call her grandmama.
Wow.
And she died when she was 21 years old with one child. Now that 200 and something that includes in-laws,
right,
and some that married and got divorced. That includes everybody that is not necessarily blood kin.
Right.
And then when you further research that, you find out she was the youngest of about 12 or 13 kids, and those 12 or 13 got out and propagated the world, and there's thousands and thousands of Davis descendants in the world. Now, my grandmother's oldest sister, which was some 22 years older than her, she married a James Watts Sprouse.
Mm-hmm.
And James Watts Sprouse and his wife is my mother's grandparents. So that meant my mother and daddy were first cousins, or once removed, and all the descendants from them is double. We doubled in two big families.
Yes.
I know you're going to be interested in some of the questions about my connections to U Harley, which are much more than the average person's, because the Burge family, U Harley, is in the grandparents' line through the Sproul family.
Mm-hmm.
John Franklin Sproul married a Burge, and of course the city of U Harley is named the street down there, the Burge Street.
Yes.
And
it was Burgess Mill, the very first name.
U Harley used to be known as Burgess Mill.
Right.
And then the other connection there is through the Sproul family. The Charles Sproul was one of the original founders of the U Harley Presbyterian Church in 1853. They were Scotch-Irish. They came here from Abbeville, South Carolina area, and anytime you get into this genealogy stuff, there's no end to it.
Yes.
But it's really an interesting subject. I haven't been able to prove a statement that's in the Stylesboro Improvement Club book that through the Burridge family that we are descendants of the George Washington family. We're not descendants of George Washington himself because he had no children.
Right.
But we probably are descendants of some of his sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Because the family tree goes much further back than George Washington's time.
Mm-hmm. I know you spend a lot of time on that. So you've done the Sproul line, you've done the Davis line, you've done the Harris line.
And the Harris line comes out of the Dickerson line.
Right.
And out of the Dickerson line is where you come from.
Yes, the Jollies. So we figured out that we are related.
Yeah.
So this has been a fairly recent discovery,
Right.
and has pleased me no end. What changes have you seen in Bartow County in your lifetime?
Bartow County was a farming county till just 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And now it's turned into being one of the fastest growing counties in the state of Georgia, and it has great potential to keep growing. And I've enjoyed doing, even though I have lived in Polk County for the last 65 years, we're just over the line in Polk, and our community is oriented toward Cartersville and Bartow County more than as much as so as if we were a part of Bartow County. Till 1960, in the 1960s, our school children all went to Bartow County schools. Then Polk County decided to take up their responsibilities to their area and move the school systems out, and of course created turmoil for a good number of years because a lot of our people that had become accustomed to Bartow County didn't want to go to other counties and didn't for a number of years, but I think that's beginning to completely heal now.
Do you think the changes are good?
For the majority of the people, it is.
Mm-hmm.
You go back to the 60s and 70s, there's very few people in Bartow County that I didn't know a good bit about, whether I actually knew every one of them or not. Today, you'd be a genius to know all of these people anymore. There's so many new people come into the communities, and if growth is good, it's good.
Who are some of the most influential people in your life?
Well, of course, no doubt my daddy and my brothers and my uncles. And, of course, Mr. Will Dorsey, I got to say.
He gave you your job when you returned from the service in the bank at Taylorsville.
Right. And he sat in the lobby of the bank the last year. He was actually on the payroll of the bank. He didn't know very little work, but he sat there and told us about the old times, and I'd give anything if I could had paid attention.
Yes, yes.
At the time, that kind of stuff didn't interest me all that much. But now I still recall stuff that he told me from time to time that's interesting to me now.
He was a mentor to you.
Right. And Mr. E.O. Davis is another one. Mr. Davis ran the Farmer Supply Company in Taylorsville. He was an influence to me. And, of course, some of the church people in particular. and I'll not call their names because I'd surely leave out
Yes.
some there.
Yes. Of what that you have done in your lifetime are you most proud?
Well, there's no doubt the family is number one there.
Yes.
I'm proud to have been a member of the Taylorsville Baptist Church for these 59 years and participated a lot of years in all the activities. And then there's a few years I slacked off and didn't participate as much as I probably should have, but sometimes you get overloaded. And then recently we have continued to try to pay more attention to that aspect of life. But that bunch of kids you see in those pictures I showed you,
Yes. You keep up with all of them.
It's the greatest thing that could happen to anybody.
I think that the Taylorsville that you knew growing up is nothing like that today. Tell us a little bit about the changes just in that community.
The Taylorsville I grew up with, you could go to the farm supply company and do business with them, and you didn't have to go nowhere else. You didn't have to have no money. You had to have a crop, and you'd pay him when the fall of the year.
Describe that, because a lot of people don't understand how that banking system worked.
Well, Mr. Davis was president of the bank most of the years that I worked there, a good many of the years, and Mr. Dorsey was the cashier. But Mr. Dorsey run the bank, and there's a lot of stuff he didn't let Mr. Davis know about, even though he was the president. He was more of an honorary president.
Right.
And if Mr. Dorsey had an application for a loan, and he'd take Mr. Davis with him to get his opinion on it, he didn't necessarily want the loan, because if he wasn't careful, Mr. Davis would end up with him because he was a lender of money too.
Yes.
In the farm supply business. But they must have been 50 or 60 families that depended on him for all of their sustenance for year round, and pay him up in the fall of the year.
When they harvested their crops.
When they harvested crop. He'd furnish them everything it took to produce the crop, furnished them living expenses during the year, and when they settled up in the fall of the year, they would pay up and then start for next year. As Mr. David Costlow used to say, if he could make it till March the 1st, he could march on that year, because that's when he claimed that Mr. Davis opened up credit. And of course, he was not the only one in Taylorsville. We had about 4 stores back in them days.
Yes.
We had a cotton gin. We had 2 or 3 cotton warehouses. And
a real thriving community.
It was a thriving community. And now today, if you ain't got a key to the lodge hall or some private home, you can't buy Coca-Cola in Taylorsville.
Yes.
You can can out on the highway. There's
Right.
a convenience store or 2 out on the highway.
Right.
But one of the convenience stores recently closed there. So when the new highway came through, it moved a little further away from town. But Taylorsville has its own city government, council, mayor and council. They function, and we very seldom ever hit the newspaper.
Like some of the other communities we know.
Sometimes they hadn't got time for us, because they got 2 or 3 other communities in the county that they're going to have headlines in every day.
Yes, yes. If you could do anything over in your life, what would it be?
Well, I think I touched on that earlier when I mentioned that if I could do it over, I would have kept the Bank of Taylorsville a strictly local community bank.
Mm-hmm.
That was, but you don't do that no more. Everybody has aspirations of growing and getting bigger.
Yes.
That bigger is better. And when we moved out and branched into Cartersville, it became an attractive investment for out-of-town money. And,
Yes.
And when they took it over, they had no interest in leaving Taylorsville.
I know you've had several careers since you left banking. Tell us about that.
I left the banking business. I went into the real estate business, worked with Auctions United, auction company out of Rome, Georgia, for about 10 or 12 years. Then I secured my broker's license and went out on my own, working from home for a year or so. And in 1993, I had a heart attack and had to have bypass surgery, and later in 2000 I retired and got away from the real estate business.
And what have you most enjoyed about being retired?
Well, it just lets me do things I want to do.
Yes.
And one of the things that I got talked into joining the U Harley Historical Society. A good friend of mine that we graduated from high school together just kept putting the pressure on me till she got me to join. Well, I was first going to just go and sit in a meeting every once in a while. And, of course, that's evolved into sometimes twice a week event of going down there and helping out down there. And I also volunteered for a project that I'm working on that I'll unveil in a few days.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm a member of the Harley Historical Society too, and we're very grateful for your help, and you've contributed some items and some histories, and so you've not only become just a member, but you're a very active member. You help us do tours of U Harley and the museum, and so we're very grateful about that.
I want to say one or two little things about U Harley. It's a very private event that may have had a major influence on U Harley that very few people know about. When the town of U Harley was owned by the Lowry estate, they left it to, when the last Lowry died, she left everything at U Harley to the Berry Schools, as you well know. Berry Schools had no use for all that property in educational wise, so they hired the J.L. Todd Auction Company to sell it. Well, I happened to go down there to the sale more as a spectator than anything else. And the mayor of U Harley, Howard Osborne, at the time, was trying to get the city of U Harley organized. But they didn't have no money. They had no grants or nothing that they could count on. And he come up to me at that auction and says, Harris, said, I'd love for the city of U Harley to buy that piece of land, pointed it out, which was on the side where the fire station is and the Howard Osborne tennis courts now. And can you loan us some money if we need to? I said, Howard, with the people I know that's back in this organization of U Harley, I'll do everything the bank can to help you in any reasonable manner. Well, the bidding started, and he wanted me to handle the bidding for him. Well, right off the bat, I saw that we weren't going to get what he wanted in the kind of price range that felt reasonable. But, so I'll not go into all the details.
Oh,
of
do,
why
because this is not well known. I think
why
it's
I
important.
recognized what was going on. The Todd Auction Company was using that particular tract that the city might have wanted to set that price high at the beginning of the sale,
Yes.
and the price just got above market. And I said, Howard, we can't do that. So we sat back and waited, and long toward the end of the sale, they got serious about selling stuff. And I said, Howard, we need to buy that tract of land over, which was less desirable than what he wanted. He said, okay, so we bid it in and got it. And the part that that got sort of touchy along during the year was, anyway, come to the bank and borrowed every penny it took to buy the land. Had the note come due on December the 31st, because cities could not obligate beyond a year. Mayor and council could not obligate a city more than a year, so it had to be paid off during that year. Well, it come December 20th, and he didn't have the money. So we had to do some finagling to get things where I let him give me a bad check, and I floated it for 3 or 4 days, and after the first of the year, he come back in and borrowed the money for another year. And during that second year, he got Joe Frank Harris, and you'll know who we're talking about there. He got later to be governor of Georgia. He got Nathan Dean, who was a state senator from Rockmart for many years. Bill Cummings from Rockmart. Olin Tatum, who was commissioner of Bartow County. All of them got to working for U. Harley and began to get them grant money and all that. So
Yes.
after about 2 years, or 3 years, we may have had to roll that note another year. And we did it in such a manner that we didn't get caught where it was illegal, but nevertheless, we did it. And now U. Harley, when they got money flowing, ended up buying the land that Howard wanted in the first place.
Right.
Then they made a deal with various schools to get all those old buildings.
Yes.
And the covered bridge and all that. Now, I don't know who the covered bridge belongs to. I have not.
I believe the Bartow County actually owns that piece.
That's what I thought. They still own that right of way in the road.
Yes.
Road right of way. Technically, they still own it, but U. Harley claims it. And,
Yes.
And some of the stuff around the bridge belongs to U. Harley.
Yes.
That they was able to get in later years. Now, I was not involved in any of that. I had left the bank by that time.
Well, I think you qualified it as illegal, but I qualified as caring and being a good citizen, because without that, the charming little community of U. Harley wouldn't exist today.
Well, we could have went another way if we'd wanted to, because Howard Osborne and Daniel Tilley and some of the most of them, we could have put the note in their names and wrote it over an extra year, but we wanted U. Harley to stand on its own, and they did, and it's been a very successful town.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. And I'm proud of that, your part in that. I did not know that until today. They also later on decided to close the traffic on the bridge and preserve it. And Olin Tatum was the commissioner when that happened, and that was a wonderful thing that took place as well.
Yeah, well, now, Olin, nowadays they got to build a bridge. They got to have the Department of Transportation in there to supervise it, and it takes years to get it approved and years to build them. But Mr. Olin, when he was a commissioner, he decided to build a bridge. He went out there and built a bridge. He built the one over Pumpkin Vine Creek on the old Alabama Road, and then he built the one at U. Harley and got things rolling.
Yes.
But you can't do that no more.
No, and I think that's unfortunate.
I know it is.
Yes. What in your life would you like to be remembered for?
That gets to be the toughest questions of all. I'd like to be remembered that I was believed in honest dealing, that I was good to my family, and that I have made lots of friends during my lifetime.
I think that's very good things to be remembered for. We have a picture here that is of you and your wife Betty on the occasion of you receiving your 50-year pin at the John W. Aiken Masonic Lodge in Taylorsville. I know that was one of your proud days.
It was. That happened in 2002, that picture did. And I have the Grand Master of Masons in Georgia made that presentation in person.
And that's quite an honor within the Masonic
Yes.
Faith.
He is in much demand, and during his years Grand Master, he's somewhere 3 or 4 times a day.
Yes,
Usually.
yes. I know there is many, many, many more things that we could cover. What have I left out?
One of the things I'd like to cover a little bit more is has to do with family. Earlier I said I had 3 children. Betty had 3, and we had 8 grandchildren and a great grand. I haven't mentioned any of their names.
Okay.
And my children are William Clayton Harris, who lives in Montgomery, Alabama. He's in the recycling business. It was a specialty of his in college. He has 1 son, and they live in, as I say, live in Montgomery, and that son is in higher education at Auburn University now. The second daughter is Mary Carol Haney. She's an employee of SunTrust Bank here on Joe Frank Harris Parkway. She's been in the banking business herself since she was about 9 years old. When she was 9 years old, I'd take her to the bank on Saturday mornings and have her to count pennies for us that we'd saved up all week. Sometimes we'd take pennies in by the pound or a gallon, and have her and 1 or 2 of the little girls to come in on Saturday and count those pennies for us. She first worked for People's Bank, as Bank of Taylorsville later became known as People's Bank of Bartow County, and then still later it turned into BB&T. She worked for them for a number of years, and then she's later an employee of SunTrust there on Joe Frank Harris Parkway. Angela is she plants. She's one of these that has a magic touch of gardening and landscaping and stuff of that nature. She learned to play the piano when she was a little bitty girl, 2 to 5, 10-year-old. She'd play the piano every morning before she went to school. But after she married, she didn't do that for about 25 years, and only recently she's took up the piano playing again, and she was interviewed by the Uharley Presbyterian Church to be their pianist here right recently. But they was a little slow at pulling the trigger, so Aragon Methodist Church called her, and she is now the pianist at the Aragon Methodist Church. Now that covers the 3 of them. Betty's children are James Floyd. He is living in Waycross now, and he's the father of Keela, who's our granddaughter, that came to live with us when she was 12-year-old, and we've had her, permanently when she was 12-year-old. She's actually the granddaughter of Reuben Pasco that lives here in Cartersville, and Eddie, who still lives here. Then there's Sandy. She's the stepdaughter that she lives in Waycross. She married a Altman, and they have a nice home down there. And she's the one that's not had children, but she's helped raise all of the other children. And she is the one she's really contributed a lot to Betty and I in helping us from time to time as we might needed help. And I've had a good bit of sickness in the last few years. And then Steve lives in Waycross. Her children all ended up here in about 1975 and stayed a good many years in North Georgia, but they all drifted back to the Waycross area now. That pretty well covers the family story now.
Mm-hmm. And you and I discussed some things, and I asked you to make some notes. What other things have I left out?
Oh. Jeannie, I believe we've covered everything you had lined up there
All right.
in some form.
All right. We'll think of things later. Both of us will.
I'm sure we will. And
well, I thank you for your willingness to do this today. And just think, if you had pneumonia as a 6-year-old and you've had a heart attack, I think you've had a wonderful life.
And I'm enjoying life now as well as ever.
Good, good.
But I did have some serious sickness in the 90s and again in the 2000s.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.